A renowned atheist journalist thought he had the perfect argument, until Jonathan Roumie, the man who portrays Jesus in The Chosen, responded with a story that changed everything. The stage was set, the bright studio lights illuminating the modern set of Faith and Culture Tonight, a primetime debate show known for its intense religious and philosophical discussions. At the center of it all sat Jonathan Roumie, the charismatic actor whose portrayal of Jesus had touched millions worldwide, with his calm demeanor and thoughtful expression. Across from him was Richard Stone, a veteran journalist with a reputation for being direct, unfiltered, and ruthless in his questioning about religious matters. Millions of people were watching. The tension was palpable, not just in the studio but across America and beyond. Though the debate had been promoted as a conversation about faith in modern society, everyone knew it was going to become something much deeper. Roumie had built a reputation for staying true to his beliefs and not shying away from difficult conversations. Richard, on the other hand, was famous for cornering his guests, exposing what he considered flaws in religious thinking. The first 20 minutes were a standard exchange about religion and entertainment, the responsibility of faith-based content creators, and the impact of The Chosen on viewers worldwide. Roumie handled the rapid-fire questions with confidence, answering with clarity and precision. He wasn't just an actor, he was a natural communicator, someone who understood how to connect with audiences both in the studio and beyond. Then Richard leaned slightly forward in his chair, narrowing his eyes. It was an almost imperceptible gesture, but any good speaker would have noticed it. He was preparing to shift the direction of the conversation to something more personal. The energy in the room changed. The producers, cameramen, even the audience seemed to sense that the debate was about to take an unexpected turn. "Jonathan," Richard began, his voice controlled, "you've spoken often about how your faith has deepened through playing Jesus, how you see your role as more than just acting. You've even suggested that portraying Christ has given you insights into divine truth." Roumie nodded slightly, waiting for the real question. "But let's be honest here," Richard continued, leaning forward. "We're living in the 21st century. Science has given us explanations for phenomena that people once attributed to God. Mental health treatment has replaced prayer for healing. Technology has connected us in ways that make ancient notions of divine intervention seem—" A murmur rippled through the audience. Roumie didn't react immediately, letting the question hang in the air, absorbing its weight. Richard wasn't just questioning his career choices, he was challenging the relevance of faith itself in the modern world. The journalist continued, "I'm asking because there are millions of people who consider faith to be nothing more than an outdated crutch, something that holds back progress rather than advancing it. Given your platform, given your influence, don't you think it's irresponsible to promote beliefs that can't be scientifically verified? Isn't it time we moved beyond these ancient stories and faced reality as it actually is?" The atmosphere tensioned. Some in the audience shifted in their seats. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every expression, every reaction. Richard had thrown a spark into dry kindling, and everyone was waiting to see if Roumie would let it burn or respond with something unexpected. But the actor didn't rush to answer. He took a breath, tilted his head slightly, and showed a small smile. He knew exactly what to say. Richard sat back, tapping his pen gently against the table, waiting. The audience waited. The silence in the studio wasn't uncomfortable. It was electric. Finally Roumie spoke, his voice calm and steady. "You say faith is an outdated crutch that holds back progress. But let me ask you something, Richard." He made a brief pause, then tilted his head just slightly. "What do people turn to when science doesn't have an answer?" Richard pressed his lips together but didn't interrupt. Roumie continued, "You see, it's easy to dismiss faith when life is comfortable. It's easy to dismiss faith when everything is going well." His voice remained steady as he continued. "When your job is stable, when your family is healthy, when the world makes sense." He made a brief pause, his gaze fixed on Richard. "But when the ground disappears from under your feet, when your child is dying in a hospital bed, when you're standing in front of a coffin, when doctors tell you there's nothing more they can do." The silence in the studio was absolute. Even the producers, who usually whispered among themselves behind the cameras, seemed frozen. Richard adjusted his tie without taking his eyes off Roumie. "People turn to faith because they're desperate," Richard said, his tone neutral. "That doesn't make it real, just comforting." Roumie nodded slightly, as if he had expected exactly that response. "Comfort isn't weakness, Richard. It's part of being human. And faith is more than simple comfort. It's resilience. It's hope. It's the belief that even in the darkest moments, there's still purpose." He leaned slightly forward. "You can call it naive if you want, but I'll tell you something. It's the only thing that has prevented people from collapsing under the weight of suffering for thousands of years." Richard exhaled through his nose, shifting slightly in his seat. "So according to you, faith is necessary for survival?" Roumie shook his head. "No. Faith is what makes survival meaningful." Richard smiled slightly and shook his head. "You're good, Jonathan. But let's talk about reality." He made a slight gesture with his hand, as if restarting the conversation. "Religious institutions have been responsible for some of the worst atrocities in history. Wars, oppression, corruption, the Crusades, the Inquisition, countless scandals. And yet you defend faith as if it's only been a force for good." Roumie didn't flinch. "I'm not going to deny that atrocities have been committed in the name of religion. But let's be fair, Richard. Faith has also been the driving force behind some of humanity's greatest acts of courage, sacrifice, and goodness." He made a brief pause. "The end of slavery, civil rights movements, countless hospitals, schools, and charities, all started by people who believed their faith called them to help others. You can't erase that just because some have perverted faith for their own agenda." Richard fell silent, studying him. He didn't have an immediate response. Roumie noticed and seized the opportunity. "But if you really want to know why I believe in faith, why I defend it," his tone dropped just slightly, "it's not because of history. It's not because of politics." He stopped for an instant. "It's because of a person I met many years ago." Richard's brow furrowed slightly. "A person?" Roumie nodded, his voice softening slightly. "Her name was Elena, and she taught me something about faith that no debate could ever erase." The audience held their breath. No one, not Richard nor the viewers, was prepared for the story they were about to hear. Roumie interlaced his fingers slightly on the table, not taking his eyes off his interviewer. "Many years ago, when I was struggling as a young actor in Los Angeles, barely making ends meet, I was volunteering at a homeless shelter. Not for publicity, not for networking, just because I needed to feel useful." He made a small pause, his voice dropping slightly. "But I was there more for myself than for them, if I'm being honest." He exhaled slowly. "But Elena." She stopped me in my tracks. Elena was probably in her 70s, maybe older. She came to the shelter not as someone seeking help, but as someone giving it. She'd show up every Tuesday with homemade sandwiches, clean socks, and somehow always knew exactly what to say to people who had given up on themselves. Richard maintained a neutral expression, but he was no longer looking at his notes. He was listening. "I learned that Elena had lost everything twice in her life," Roumie continued, his voice firm. "The first time was in El Salvador during the Civil War. She lost her home, her husband was killed, and she fled to America with nothing but her 2 young children." He made a brief pause, letting those words sink into the studio. "She worked 3 jobs, learned English, built a life from scratch. Then 20 years later, her son was killed in a car accident, and her daughter died from cancer within 6 months of each other." Roumie's voice tensioned just slightly. "I remember asking her how she did it, how she could endure so much loss and still show up every week with that smile, treating strangers like family, as if the world hadn't tried to take everything from her." He looked at Richard, but this time not as an opponent, but as one human being speaking to another. "Her answer is something I'll never forget." The actor swallowed before continuing. "She told me, 'Mijo, faith isn't about having proof. Faith is about what keeps you standing when there is no proof.'" The silence in the studio was absolute. Even the hum of the cameras seemed to have vanished. She told me that every morning she woke up and thanked God, not because her life had been easy, not because suffering had passed her by, but because she was still here, because she still had something to give. Roumie exhaled slowly. I was 26 when I met her. I thought I understood what strength was, but Elena showed me what it really means. He leaned slightly forward, and in that moment I understood something. Faith isn't something people cling to out of desperation. It's what keeps them from falling apart. The words floated in the air. Richard blinked, opening his mouth slightly as if to respond, but then closed it. He couldn't find the words. The weight of Roumie's story could be felt throughout the studio. Even the host, normally eager to keep the program's pace moving, remained silent. Roumie didn't fill the void. He let it be. Finally, Richard cleared his throat, moving slightly in his seat. That's a powerful story, he admitted, his voice lower than before. But don't you think it's just that, a story? Elena found something that worked for her. That doesn't mean faith is a universal truth. Roumie nodded slightly, as if he had anticipated that response. You're right, Richard, he said. Faith isn't about proving something to others. It's about what people have lived through. He made a brief pause before continuing. And if you really listen, if you truly pay attention, you'll hear that story told millions of times in different ways. Richard exhaled heavily, rubbing the bridge of his nose. See, Jonathan, that's my problem with faith. It can't be measured. It's based on emotions, on experiences. It can't be quantified. And yet people use it to justify decisions that affect everyone. Roumie tilted his head just slightly. Are you referring to something like hope, Richard? Richard blinked. Hope? Yes. Hope also can't be measured. It's not scientific. You can't prove its existence in a tangible way. He let those words settle before continuing. And yet people have fought wars for it, survived the impossible because of it, clung to it even when logic told them they shouldn't. Richard shifted in his seat, but didn't interrupt him. Roumie looked at him intently. Tell me, Richard, if someone loses their home in an earthquake, would you tell them that their hope isn't more than simple emotional comfort? That their belief that something better will come isn't real just because you can't put it under a microscope? The journalist didn't respond. Roumie maintained his firm gaze. That's the point about faith. Faith isn't about controlling people. It's not about imposing a belief on anyone. His voice resonated with calm, but with unwavering firmness. It's about how people manage to make sense of the most difficult moments in life. Richard looked at him in silence. You can call it irrational, Richard. But when someone loses everything and still gets up the next day, when they keep going, when they find strength where none remains, there's something in that, something you can't measure, but you can't ignore either. Richard drummed his fingers softly on the table. His usual sharp and challenging posture seemed to have softened. He was no longer debating. He was thinking. The host, noticing the change in atmosphere, decided to intervene. Richard opened his mouth to speak, but then closed it. He glanced at the audience, as if looking for some sign, some clue to anchor him in the conversation. But no one spoke. No one moved. Finally, his voice no longer had the edge it had before. I think I need to process this. A murmur went through the audience. It wasn't the fierce counterattack many expected. It wasn't a devastating refutation or a clear victory. It was something much rarer. A moment of honesty. But the real reaction, the one that would shake the entire country, was still to come. The debate ended a few minutes later, but the conversation was far from over. The final applause sounded hesitant, as if the audience was still trying to assimilate what they had witnessed. No one got up with the usual rush. It wasn't just another political exchange. They had felt something, and that wasn't easy to ignore. Richard looked at Roumie, gave him a slight nod, and removed his microphone without saying another word. He left the studio. He didn't stay for the post-debate analysis or informal chat. He walked straight to the exit with rigid shoulders, lost in his thoughts. Roumie, in contrast, remained in his seat a few more seconds. He could hear the whispers of the technical team, see how the audience exchanged glances. Some seemed moved, others uncomfortable, but no one was indifferent. Then the cameras turned off, and the first wave arrived. His phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Missed calls, messages, notifications accumulating. Social media had exploded. Clips of the exchange were circulating at full speed. Every word was analyzed. Every gesture debated. But what surprised Roumie most wasn't the reaction of his usual supporters. It was the response from those who had never supported him before. "I'm not religious, but what he said made me think. I've never heard someone defend faith without attacking those who don't believe. That was different. This wasn't about politics. This was about something bigger." Post after post, comment after comment. People weren't arguing as usual. Sure, there were critics, the expected rejection from those who completely dismissed the topic, but something was happening. Something Roumie hadn't seen in a long time. People weren't just reacting. They were listening. His team was already in motion, coordinating media responses. The headlines didn't take long to arrive. Jonathan Roumie leaves atheist journalists speechless, an unexpected debate that's shaking America. Did Roumie just change the conversation about faith in entertainment? Even the nighttime analysis shows, which rarely gave space to figures like him without ridiculing them, were discussing it seriously. But the most surprising thing was Richard. He said nothing all night. No tweets, no interviews, no follow-up comments. He, who was always the first to take control of the narrative, remained in absolute silence. Until the next morning. At 8:47 a.m., he finally broke his silence with a single message. "I've been in journalism for over 35 years. Last night was the first time I left an interview realizing I had more questions than answers. That was it. No grandiose statements, no attempts at damage control, just honesty. And that was enough to unleash a new wave of reactions. But the real impact of what had happened wouldn't be clear for days. What had begun as a standard debate about faith and entertainment had transformed into something much deeper. It was no longer just about Roumie or Richard. It was about something people had been avoiding admitting for years. People were looking for something more. Social media was saturated with the topic. It was impossible to scroll through the internet without seeing the debate analyzed from every angle. Podcasters, columnists, and commentators gave their opinions. Some called it a defining moment for faith in public discourse. Others saw it as a wake-up call. But the most surprising reactions came from the most unexpected places. A comedian famous for ridiculing religion admitted on his podcast, "Look, I still don't believe in God, but that man made me wish I could believe, and that says something." A renowned scientist tweeted, "Faith and science don't have to be enemies." Last night reminded me why so many people still cling to belief, even in the face of uncertainty. But then came the emails. Roumie's inbox had always been full, messages from fans, critics, political petitions, but now messages were arriving from people who didn't fit into any of those categories. One in particular caught his attention. It was from a woman named Sarah. "I haven't set foot in a church in 15 years. I lost faith long ago. But after watching your debate, I sat in my car and cried. Not because I suddenly found God or anything dramatic, but because I realized something. I missed believing in something bigger than myself. I didn't even know how much until last night. Thank you for making me think." Roumie read the message twice, then a third time. He had spent his career fighting for roles, debating scripts, building a career. But this was different. This wasn't about winning an argument. It wasn't about getting fans. It couldn't be measured in ratings or social media metrics. It was about a conversation people were afraid to start. And it wasn't just Sarah. In the following weeks, more stories arrived. People sharing their own Elenas, their grandmothers, their neighbors, the stranger in a hospital waiting room who had whispered words of faith when they needed them most. This wasn't about proving who was right and who was wrong. It wasn't about conversions or ideological victories. It was about remembering that faith, whether in God, in humanity, or in something still incomprehensible, isn't weakness. It's what has kept people standing when everything else has failed. And that realization is something no debate can ever erase. As the echo of the debate began to fade, one thing became clear. This hadn't been just another political moment. It wasn't something that would be forgotten in a news cycle. It wouldn't be buried in the endless noise of social media. It was a reminder that no matter how divided we seem, no matter how loudly the world shouts that faith is obsolete, there are still people searching for meaning. There are still people looking for something beyond the tangible. That night, Rumi didn't try to change minds. He just told a story. But sometimes, a story is enough. And if this story made you think, if it moved something inside you, don't let it end here. Keep asking questions. Keep searching. Keep listening. Because sometimes the answers we're looking for don't come from winning a debate. They come in conversations we never expected to have.